We're here today with Dr. Marie Kelleher, a medieval historian or a medievalist. She's not from the medieval period, right? But you are a historian of the medieval period.
I'm old, but I'm not that old. That's right.
And author of The Measure of a Woman, Law and Female Identity in the Medieval Crown of Aragon. And I think she's working on a book right now about food.
Food in medieval Barcelona.
Perfect.
Yes.
So we brought the right person.
I do a lot of great research.
I was going to say.
You got to pick your research topics well, you know?
I think we have.
So we, our research topics.
This is well done. Well done, gentlemen.
So we have brought the right person to talk about a plague tale, Innocence.
We always start with asking, obviously, the study of video games for us is looking at the lens of history through popular culture. So we have a particular medium here, video games. And so broadly speaking, we usually ask, how generally, or specifically as you might talk to, has the medieval period been used or portrayed or appropriated within popular culture or society at large? That's a big question.
It is. Yeah. Try and keep it to 90 seconds, right? Am I still in frame? I am not. Sorry, I keep moving around.
You don't have to
here.
look at me.
Oh, I know, but it's weird to answer you in the back of my head. Okay, so where am I? There I am. Okay, so I have obviously I think the most notable ways. I'm not as aware of the video game universe as my two colleagues here are. The most notable ways that the medieval has been used in popular culture has been through television. Well, first through novels, when people read books, and then through film and television. And so we can actually go all the way back to the 19th century and look at some popular 19th century novels and early 20th century novels. And the series that people are probably most familiar with is J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. And we're all familiar with that.
Place.
That. Before it was a movie, it was a book. And it was a series of books, just like a series of movies. And alongside that, and these two men were actually colleagues, C.S. Lewis' Narnia series. And these two sort of set the pattern for how the medieval has been perceived in popular culture. And I think it's important in that sense to note that J.R.R. Tolkien was a specialist in Old English literature, and he considered himself an Anglo-Saxonist. And so the medieval world that he portrayed was kind of a combination of his linguistic research and the sort of fervent nationalist climate of his day. And so you have a lot of sort of the fantasy elements that we associate with the medieval and popular culture came from him, but also some of the less savory elements, the white supremacy, the racism, the sexism, all of those things that we see sort of taken for granted, the notion that, the Middle Ages, medieval equals white, medieval equals sort of this Northern European Englishness. And the Tolkien, of course, has been incredibly influential. You can't understate his influence on how a popular culture has portrayed the Middle Ages, I think.
With the recent advent of the newest films in the Tolkien universe, has this given more rise to interest in the medieval period?
Oh yeah, I always get a bump anytime that I love it for my courses. It's great, right? Because I get my enrollments in my courses go way up. Although if I taught medieval England, they'd go up a lot more. And I should explain, I work on the other part of the Middle Ages, which is medieval Spain, where the whole point is you've got Jews, you've got Christians, you've got Muslims, this is largely true for a lot of medieval Europe, but it is especially true for medieval Spain. But back to your question, yes, it's great for my enrollments. I've gotten enrollment bumps from the Lord of the Rings franchise. The most recently Game of Thrones. The books are still coming, still books. But now that the TV series is over, I'm expecting a slight decline in my enrollments. I got one for when I started here, I was getting a Harry Potter bump, and God help us, even a Da Vinci Code bump, which was terrible. But that's another story for another day.
Then what ideas are students bringing to the class from these? Are they tracking along any sort of historical line, or are they merely just fantasy?
They're a little bit of both, actually. They start from the fantasy space, but that doesn't mean that they're not curious to learn, what really happened, which I love. In fact, I build my medieval survey course around this notion I call myths of the medieval. Mm-hmm. And so every couple of weeks we take on something that is popularly believed about the Middle Ages and that is part of this fantasy space, and it has usually a grain of truth into it. Yeah. And then we dive into the sources and figure out, okay, where is this true? Where is it problematic? Where is it just made up? So things like in the Middle Ages, women were basically property and had no rights. And that is sort of gender history is one of my specialties. And so I say the answer is always yes and no. And so that is one of the things that I really enjoy doing is starting from, people come to the Middle Ages, to the study of the Middle Ages from a number of different places. They come from novels, they come from movies, they come from gaming a lot more recently. And nobody comes in and says, I wanted to study the Middle Ages because I read all 6 volumes of Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. That has never, ever, ever happened.
That is yet to happen.
And that's how I came to the Middle Ages, through popular culture, through books.
Not through Fall of the Roman Empire.
Not through Fall. I have yet to read all 6 volumes, and I probably will die never having read all 6 volumes of Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. But I came to it through a book with a dragon.
Right.
And so I expect that this is not a bad place to begin. And I just try to meet the students there, recognize in them the person I was at their age, and full of enthusiasm and wanting more knowledge. And so I don't walk into the class and say, Santa Claus does not exist.
Yeah.
I'm like, let's talk a little bit about Santa.
Santa Dragon.
So,
yes,
Dragon
exactly.
Santa.
I think
Exactly.
we've noticed this a lot too. Students who see things come to our courses, right, and play games and ask questions about those games. Like, curiosity is really important.
Yes.
We have a question here.
From one of our
One of our many correspondents.
And I'll frame as best I can. Is our image of medieval mostly different than other countries have? That is, this game is set in France, and do French readers read this different? Or is the popular media so subsumed our sense of the medieval?
That is a really good question. And I think that most, and I can't really speak for a lot of places because I would have had to immerse myself in all of these. We get our notion of the medieval pretty much straight from England, right? So our notion of the medieval and English notion of the medieval are going to be, and it came sort of, through people like Thomas Jefferson, actually, who absolutely loved these ideas. So our notion of the medieval and the notion of the medieval in England are probably going to be, the pop culture notion are probably going to be very similar. But we have to remember that we don't have, unlike countries in, say, Europe, we don't have our own medieval history.
Right.
So ours is borrowed. And ours is borrowed primarily from England. And other countries have legacies of the medieval that are, that have some of the same preoccupations, this preoccupation with, kings and knights. And they have their own literatures that stem from the similar medieval traditions. But they also have their own preoccupations. So Spain, where I study, their notion of the medieval is very much wrapped up in these ideas of, or at least the pop culture notion is very wrapped up in these ideas of conflict and coexistence between Christians, Muslims, and Jews. And that's a very, very broad area in their construction of their own idea of a national past that also took shape in the 19th and early 20th centuries.
So, going, I guess, back a little bit, as you kind of formulate maybe American sense of the medieval being developed through Tolkien and Lewis and others.
Mm-hmm.
So, but you referenced Thomas Jefferson. Is it in the late 18th, 19th century, the connections to the medieval distant, or just don't resonate with sort of American ideals?
I think, well, that's really complicated. We knew we were going to. How long did we get into this before?
Video games.
No, how long did we get into this before? This is the historian's favorite phrase. That's complicated.
Yes.
So memorize that, and people will think you're a professional historian. Well, okay, it is quite complicated because, of course, the early America is founded, and our governmental notion is in many ways structured around systems that are explicitly modeled not on the Middle Ages but on the Roman Republic, the late Roman Republic. Very different, right? You ever wonder why our government moves so slowly? It's by design. But there are pillars. We can talk about the pillars later. But Jefferson was also very enamored of some of the early ideas of an Anglo-Saxon past, and this quasi-mythical and mythicized Anglo-Saxon and I'm going to use the air quotes here, Germanic past that were coming out of England and beginning to come out of England and the continent at this time. And so he saw, he is one of the early ones to sort of say, well, this, semi-fictional Anglo-Saxon past is in fact our past because we're basically English. And so that means we're basically Anglo-Saxon. And of course, not true. There's, like most myths, there's a tiny grain of truth in there. But this has been kind of appropriated wholesale. And so it's baked into, even though now we acknowledge the United States as a multi-ethnic, pluralistic place where our, if there is such a thing as a single national character, it's been shaped by lots and lots of influences. People still tend to fall back on that Jeffersonian notion that comes out of that very early period, and that's wrapped up with nationalism in England and on the continent.
And I think in extension, what you had talked briefly to me earlier is the way that sort of nationalism and medievalism has been appropriated and connected in our society by particular groups.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And in particularly, let me use the big word here, particularly tendentious ways. So these ways that...
We're big people.
Oh, okay,
we can handle those.
excellent. So particularly tendentious ways where it is... this is where I get into my rant against the idea of tradition.
That's okay.
That's okay. All right. This idea that, and what I mean by that is that it is the whole notion of tradition is that we grab an isolated piece of the past, we pull it out of context, and we say, this is our history, right? And it's that isolated piece of the past combined with whatever someone's trying to sell you at the moment. And so whenever I hear, someone invoke tradition or traditional this and that, my little antenna go up like, maybe we need to be a little more cautious here about what is somebody trying to convince me of without telling me that they're trying to convince me of something.
We have another question here. Mm-hmm. Do you feel that video game developers, I know you don't do, but in general, popular medium, have a responsibility to broaden the scope of their games to encourage the study of diversity of the Middle Ages?
I think that something like that. Now, I should explain to people because we didn't start off with this. The last time I played a video game, I think, was in an arcade, and it was Frogger. I was super good at that.
She really found this to be something.
This is very similar to the. You can see this. This is the complexity of video gaming that I'm personally familiar with. So I am just as glad that my colleagues have played. When you see the gameplay, it's probably not going to be anything to do with me. Okay, so back to the question. The question was, do I believe that game developers have a responsibility? I would hesitate to use the word responsibility because game developers are creative people, right? They are working on a creative product, and I think that we should that to sort of say, well, here are what creatives should be working on is not creativity, right? But, and here's where I get to the but. Part of the reason, the problem here is not that we're not telling video game developers what they need to be working on. The problem is I think, a lack of diversity among developers. And once you if you have, 80% the same type of people from the same type of demographic making a creative product, that is where their imaginative field is going to go is more likely to go towards this, down along the same paths. You start encouraging developers from underrepresented groups, whether it's sexes, genders, ethnicities, national origin, socioeconomic status, different viewpoints. You start encouraging more people like that in the field of developers and in the field of gaming itself. And those developers are going to bring different ideas to the table, just like in film or any other creative endeavors. And those gamers, a more diverse set of gamers who are made more welcome, are going to start demanding and supporting games and development that they can see themselves in, where they feel more welcome there. So I think that that's where the effort needs to be, not telling people what they should and shouldn't be creating, but having people who are more, who represent a more diverse set of interests, actually getting people into both on the development side and on the gaming side.
So yeah, and it plays into a lot of what game studies people look at is that, and also player expectations. So if you have the players who expect certain things and they're more diverse, then maybe you can play to that also.
Right, exactly. And making it not just, okay, here is your cast of player characters and here's your female character, or here's your character of color, or here's your character with a disability, but saying you have a range to choose from here, not just here's your one choice, and starting to make it less an exception and more part of the norm, I think is really important.
Rolling them into a narrative framework that it's not just, hey, we're going to tag on this woman character. It becomes a kind of footnote to the action, but becomes central to the way that both the history is interpreted, which would change the narrative function and the narrative of the game itself.
Right, and I want to be clear about something else here. I am not saying that cis white men cannot develop diverse characters, but that people, if they're developing a character who they don't have an insider perspective of, should make sure that they talk to people who are part of that group, so you don't end up in starting with good intentions and unwittingly perpetuating stereotypes. And so it requires a lot of conversations, and some of those conversations are going to be really hard, I think.
Another question.
Yes. Sorry, that was a really long answer. You're supposed to have like the bell that you ring when I'm going too far.
This is all good.
Okay.
And this is what we want. So the game, you kind of alluded to, and I think you noticed, does have a female protagonist.
Mm-hmm.
One of the main antagonists in this is the rat. So we have a question about the rat. And I know
Okay.
as the questioner
I love rat questions.
it says, although gameplay hasn't started yet, sorry.
Okay, that's okay. We're going to get to it, we promise.
Would one argue that too much credit is, or that's how they frame it, is attributed to the rats and the role in spreading the plague? What about the role of hygiene, cleanliness practices, or lack thereof in spreading the plague is represented, blah, 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 blah.
Or climate change.
Or climate change. This is my, I came in with this,
that
right?
was a rough segue, but...
That was really rough, but we're going to, thank you. So, funny you should mention climate change.
I don't know.
And so we were talking about this, we should explain, we were talking about this a little bit before. The rat is what we would call a disease vector, right? The rat carries the rat is the typical animal vector that carries the insect, well, not really insect, but the ectoparasite, so the bug vector, let's say, which in turn carries the disease. And so the rats are not like biting you and giving you the plague. It's the fleas that are on the rats, and when the rat dies, if the rat is near a person, they're like, well, I'd rather eat a rat than a person, but sure, in a pinch, right? And so they'll snack on you and you get the plague. But it's the rat, of course, is not it did not start off with rats. It started off with these things that look like giant gerbils that live in Central Asia. And we can talk more about those in a while.
That's a different game.
That is a totally different game. Yes, I know.
You might have to hit the bell on
exactly.
that.
But another thing that is important, so the rats are important. And I'll get to the question about hygiene, I promise. The rats are important. The role of communication and the non-isolation of medieval Europe is really important, because in the 14th century, when the plague pandemic hits Europe for the first time in 700 years, something like that, it is a time when there is vast and widespread communication in terms especially of trade, but also missionaries in medieval Europe, travelers, pilgrims between Western Europe, the Eastern Mediterranean, the Near East, Persia, Central Asia, sometimes even as far as China. And so that communication, that connectedness, that's so much a feature of this part of the Middle Ages, is something we need to look at. And then finally, and I will try and keep this really short, we also need to look at the role of climate change, because one of the things, to make a long story very short, one of the things that kind of pushes the original rodent vectors living in Central Asia into contact with these trade routes that are crossing happens to be a change in climate that happens in the starts in the late 13th and early 14th centuries, and kind of kills off their habitat and pushes them closer to rat populations, which are much more used to hanging out around humans. As far as hygiene, look, you there is the Middle Ages gets a reputation as being especially unhygienic, and compared to our civilization, absolutely. Compared to the 18th century and 17th century, the age of the Enlightenment, probably about the same. And rats are going, just like today, scavengers are going to live close to where there is people and where there is food and food stores. And when we don't live in a world that is, hermetically sealed like ours, human beings and scavengers are going to live cheek by jowl, and that's just a part of life.
All right. I think we're ready for some gameplay.
Okay, excellent.
I think that was an excellent introduction.
As we move to that, can you dispel the ring around Rosie?
I cannot do it specifically because it comes out of the early modern period, but just to kind of explain, there is this idea that there's this childhood rhyme, ring around the Rosie, I won't sing it, but that it is about the Black Death and people dying, and sort of some characteristic markings that would show up. And honestly, I do not know enough about
Fair
that
enough.
period to say yes, no, or maybe.
Okay.
Let me go with this. It's complicated.
Right. Perfect. All right. All right, we're gonna switch here to game footage. It might glitch a little bit. Just be
Do you
patient.
need me to move, or
No.
are we good here?
Oh, look
Okay.
at that. It
Woo!
worked.
It's so
And we
pretty.
shifted.
One of the
Oh, it's a
comments.
beautiful fall day.
And this is a little macro blocky because of the twitching, but generally
Okay.
comments are about the environment being really nice, and at least
Yeah.
inviting or disinviting as far as the rats.
As long
go.
as you don't want to see yourself, we can switch to a larger screen.
I
You can
don't.
stare at.
I don't care. Okay, I'm just making sure that I haven't gone out of the frame.
Probably
Have I?
Is the sound
not.
coming through?
The sound is coming through to them.
Okay, that's
if you
fine.
want sound,
Doggy.
there are headphones there that
Okay, which way do I need to go? I need to go this way.
come
More
towards
free.
us.
Okay, excellent.
You might want to wear the headphones
Me?
If you,
Yeah.
if
No,
you
because I
want.
want to be able to hear you guys
because
too.
the text in play didn't come.
Oh, I
So
see.
you can put them on half on.
Yeah,
half
do
off,
it
or
like
just
you're
do
a
that.
producer
Yeah.
or something.
Like now you look like a DJ.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly. I'm like the world's oldest and unhippest DJ.
We're sending you to Ibiza next, not
Oh,
Barcelona.
ooh, nice. Okay, I'm out of here. Let's go. Let's go. Okay, I'm sorry. So there's no subtitles or anything.
Not yet. There will be in some other clips, but Jeff hadn't.
I hadn't turned them on yet until I realized I should turn them on.
Oh wait, so something. So you're playing this right now,
This is-
right?
This
Playing
is-
her.
Okay. Oops, sorry. We're.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay, David.
So we are, so they're in the forest and they're doing things. One of the things I noticed, I watched the trailer, so this is my preview. And one of the things I noticed was that I anticipate is going to be coming is, oh, look, she found a thing around a tree. She doesn't care.
That is a scarf her mother tied around the tree ages ago. So these are, I would say, petty nobility, kind of middling nobility.
Yeah, she's got a very fancy tunic.
Yeah, Dad is the lord of this space, and the Inquisition will be after them very soon, which I have questions about.
Oh, and
But
I
we'll get to.
have thoughts.
Okay, good. But we should probably stick at this point to kind of environment and maybe even kind of the way the character is. Let me get a little less macro blocking.
Mm-hmm.
If Jeff would quit moving his camera around there, we can.
I was trying to get maximum environmental scenery,
So we'd have something to talk about.
Dr.
One of
Kelleher,
the things that I do want to talk about is sort of like the visual depiction. First of all, I watched the trailer online on YouTube, and it is just visually, it's a beautiful game.
Yeah.
It is a visually beautiful game. And one of the things that I anticipate, based on the scenes I saw in the trailer, which aren't this sort of like happy prequel, it is visually a real contrast. I mean, here we have this sort of beautiful, long fall light slanting through this peaceful grove of trees, and then everything else, everything that you get once the action starts seems dark.
Yes.
It is visually dark, and so they're doing a good job of using kind of light and shadow to signal, to do some really good tonal work here. And so I just got to say first, it's gorgeous. It is absolutely gorgeous. So y'all should play this game just so you can watch the scenery is what I'm saying.
The costuming.
I have
fantasy.
Yeah, it
more
is.
than.
I am, and honestly, it would. What you said about them being kind of, petty nobles.
Right.
It would sort of make sense. But I don't. Honestly, I'm not as much
Look at that.
on.
Look how strong he is.
He's burly.
That's
Look
how
at that.
medieval men were.
They were manly men. They were manly men. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So she's out walking with her father, and the dog has gone to run off. Oh, and they're going to have some fruit. That's lovely.
She's going to learn how to use her main weapon. She's going to take an apple and everything.
You played it.
Okay, so you're going to like.
Yeah, this is a.
Okay, so we're going to see here. So this is where you get to practice throwing things, a skill that will be important later in the game, I assume, right? Okay. That's actually really smart. So you get to, as a gamer, you get to figure out how to do, even as a novice, you can figure out.
Yeah, this is the tutorial.
Yes.
Most games start with a little introductory mechanics moment.
And see how I'm learning.
And Jeff is very bad at this point.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
I'm bad because, one, I haven't learned the mechanic well, and two, I haven't gained skill points, essentially, as the game develops.
Oh,
so
I
later
see.
in the game, I
She's
am
gonna
just
get better?
She'll level up.
Wham.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Not to toot your own horn.
Yeah.
I will be impressed by that when that moment comes.
Yes.
Do you want to...
We can
scrub
move,
to a...
we can move this forward a little bit.
Or to a... Yeah.
Well, we can get at least to the Inquisition, right?
Oh, yeah.
Let's see if we go.
Nobody
hold on,
expected
don't.
that.
Sorry. Hi.
Nobody expected that.
Nobody expects the Inquisition.
Okay, see, I am a nerd.
I'm going to. Things are going haywire here. Give me 1 second.
Okay, no,
Let's
that's a
try
problem.
this.
What should we can vamp here. What should we talk about?
Ren Fair.
Oh, I've never been to one.
Oh, wow.
I have never in my life been to a Ren Fair or a medieval times restaurant.
I was
But you
gonna-
know what? If that is people's jam, go for it. You do you because it makes you happy, right? And it's just not ever been something that I'm interested in. So it is, and so I can't comment on it because I've
All right,
never
we're
been.
having issues with scrubbing for some reason.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I keep breaking.
Try to just go to chapter 8.
Okay.
Pull up chapter 8.
Okay.
All the way,
Sounds good.
huh?
So we're
Yeah,
going to talk about. So this game has got It's set in the mid 14th century.
Yep.
In the south of France. And so just to give some I'll give
There
some
you go.
historical background while we get this going, right?
Mhm.
So it's set in the mid 14th century in the south of France. It's set in 1348 precisely. And this is what one early popular, mid 20th century popular historian called the calamitous 14th century. And it was pretty bad because you've got, it starts off with famine. Then you get more climate change. Then you get into the 100 Years' War, and overlapping with, and kind of smack in the middle of that, you get the Black Death pandemic. And so it's a pretty bad century. And this is in the south of France, which is by this time it is part of the Kingdom of France. But up until fairly recently, about, 100 to 150 years before this, give or take, which is something you get to say when you're a medievalist, not when you're an American historian. It was only nominally under the control of the French kings, and the counts and the dukes who ran places like Aquitaine and Toulouse were more or less independent. It was also at that time kind of a hotbed of what we might call religious creativity, where you've got people who are experimenting. Experimenting is the wrong word, but they're developing their own interpretations of Christianity that around 1300 get labeled heresy. And this is around the time that the papacy, the popes and the sort of central bureaucracy of the Catholic Church pulled together enough organization to be able to develop a way to root out and prosecute heresy, and this is the Inquisition. So that's our historical background right there.
At this moment, this is chapter 9, maybe a little further I went, but this is fine, where Amicia...
That's the young woman.
Yes.
Okay, who's traveling with her brother, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hugo.
Okay.
And he has a condition that has not been detailed. We don't know what it is. He gets seizures. He's got weird blood things on him.
At this point, we're going to spoil stuff if you haven't played the game.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
Spoiler alert. And they found a safe place finally in this old castle, which I kind of wanted to show, which is the video before. We can always go back.
That's not her little brother, though.
No,
No.
that's a thief she's working with that helps her stealthily get things. So they need to now go find the sacred text at the university, but to find that sacred text, they first have to go through a village.
Okay. All right.
This is.
We can talk about universities here if you want.
We're going to get there. I have to do some rat killing.
Okay.
And some inquisitioning off.
Okay. All right. Excellent. So this is going to be
The
fun.
Inquisition is there, see?
You want to? So you can see the
Okay,
titles
so
here
we're-
aren't too interesting, but there is some dialogue from like the. Please. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're looking at this here. Okay, we have a thief being sort of displayed.
Yes.
All right.
As a punishment.
All right.
The other thief, the woman there. You have two females here, kind of primary roles. Her brother's been captured. She's worried if he's going to get executed. Also in the stocks.
Okay. All right. And something like this, I mean, you would probably see something like this more in a much later period, but it wouldn't be for execution. A lot of medieval punishment would have been sort of, public shaming and signaling somebody as an outcast. And then sometimes there would also be mutilation. So if they weren't guilty of an especially serious crime, there might be some visible mutilation. So everybody would know that this person is a thief, or you wear some sort of a badge or a special type of clothing to sort of show what sort of an outsider or outcast you are. We can talk about the Inquisition and execution later when we get to it.
So this thief kind of represents more fantasy trope than,
Ah, boy,
Right.
yeah, that's one that I'm really not entirely
It's
sure.
very Dungeon and
and
Dragon-y.
Dragon-y, yeah.
Yes.
Every once in a while, you're starting to run into your bard, you run into your thief, you have
Mhm.
your cleric or your paladin.
Okay, so she is on her journey, picking up
Yes.
allies and
Leveling up.
wise people who will,
And I'm not-
give her advice along the way, I
Yes.
suppose.
Yeah, and this is an interesting moment.
You're hesitating an awful lot here.
My son had woken up.
I just thought you were really unsure.
I don't want to go through that door.
Yeah,
There,
exactly.
finally took care of everything.
Okay, excellent. Excellent. This is great. This is the director's cut.
Yeah.
Nice.
There is talk about editing these
Once we get it,
to
yeah.
greatest hits, but
Okay.
you are the first guinea pig in the watching of gameplay like
Oh,
this.
okay. Well, no, this is great because we can actually focus on, something I know something about. Not.
And we're gonna get in the issues here. I try not to deviate too much, but to make it through the game, you have to have certain things you can use to get by people
Oh,
again.
okay. So she's stealing ingredients.
Mhm.
Yes.
For
All right.
For
Alchemy.
alchemy.
We'll talk about
There's
alchemy
lots
too.
of alchemy in this game.
We'll talk about alchemy later too. If you
We should
want
go to Laurentius's house.
Okay. So she's stealing some stuff, but she's on her way to steal a book, right?
Yeah, she's got to get to the university first, so she has to get through the town. The university, apparently, this is in the middle of town,
Okay.
and it's very brightly lit.
Okay.
It's the only brightly lit place, other than the beginning, that I can
Right.
think of, except for where they were just at, which was a castle, and it was the morning. So
Okay.
again, there was a safe place.
Okay. All right.
But now we're back into sort of
Danger.
danger.
Okay.
And
And so this
Okay.
is the equivalent of City Wall.
And there should be
Okay.
that's the university in the distance.
All
I
right.
think.
Excellent. So like those little towers in the background
Yeah.
there. Okay. All right. I think I get this. So yeah, the medieval university would have probably been in the center of the city,
Okay.
but you can't really think of it as a campus like we do now. Classes, the university is really just a group of people, and classes would be held in like upstairs rooms over taverns, and just wherever they could, and sort of spread out. So it would have to be in the center of a city because that's where you've got the kind of space that you can have. And it's only towards the very end of the Middle Ages that you start seeing religious orders founding what they call colleges, which are actual buildings where the students could lodge and hold their classes. But it's very much in terms of the structure, the physical nature of the university, it's very ad hoc. They would they would have rooms that they might pay to use on a weekly basis and hold these lectures, which are literally a professor reading to the book from you and then occasionally asking you a
That's not
question
what you
about
do?
it. That is, well, that's...
That's why
This is why my enrollments are so low. Okay, no, it was. So it's not. You're not going to have a physical university, but it is because of that very nature. The group of students are going to be and masters are going to be congregating in population centers, and it also meant that if the town wasn't treating them well enough, they could get up and move.
Oh.
And so they have a lot of economic power, so they could
wow.
get a lot of concessions from a town in order to do it. And they would have to basically write their own textbooks and things. So it was very different. So, but they still drank a lot.
Right.
So there are some things that are similar.
Here are some rats. You can see
Where?
in the distance.
Ooh, with their little glowing eyes.
They're afraid of the light.
That's super creepy.
So
We've been discussing this and trying to figure out if they're actually metaphorical, as in that this is the plague in a kind of physical shape.
Yeah, you
can
can't
fight
really show
the
bacteria
plague, right?
because they're little.
you can't really show it. Bug vector alert.
Exactly. Okay,
There's
so
this is
are you?
alchemy.
Oh,
I
well
melted
done.
his helmet.
You melted his helmet with alchemy?
Actually, I just heard it, and then he took it off, and I whacked him in the head with a stone.
Okay. All right. So she's
And
got
now you're
little.
gonna light a fire.
So
With
she's
an
got.
ignifier, which is alchemy.
Okay. Yeah.
So now the rats stay away from the fire.
Okay, so you're making little fires so you can make a safe path through it.
Yes.
But you can't grab that because that's like a medieval lamp.
You
It would
cannot.
be so nice if you could.
But you cannot.
Right.
And
Like,
so, talk to us about alchemy.
Okay, alchemy is really interesting. In a sense, alchemy is sorry, I've been like distracted by the rats. They're kind of hypnotic, aren't they? You just can't look away. So the alchemy is sort of a, in some ways, it is a precursor to chemistry. And in other ways, it's really not. Because if you walked up, like say you stumbled on, you opened a door and there's an alchemist doing their alchemist things. And it would look very much like what a chemist is doing. They'll have certain, containers and flasks and jars, and they'll have things that they are mixing together to get a certain... This is my understanding of chemistry. By the way.
no, we're not laughing at you.
Oh, okay.
We're laughing at a paused game screen that has been...
That is-
How long is this pause?
Oh, I see. Okay, do you have another child working on something? Okay, all right.
Childs.
Okay, excellent. They're both unruly. Okay, so
But it
if you
gives us time.
if you walked into an alchemist's workshop, it would look a lot like chemistry, right? They're mixing things together and trying to get a certain physical result. And there's most people kind of think of an alchemist as someone who tries to transform lead into gold. What alchemists were really trying to do is they saw what they were doing as they saw what they were doing as a metaphor for the transmutation of the soul. And so what they're trying to do there, the physical result, the physical actions are supposed to bridge the gap between, like, if they do it right and in the right frame of mind, in the properly spiritual frame of mind, it'll bridge that gap between the physical and the metaphysical, and so they're transforming their soul. They're not trying to make one thing turn into another thing in front of them there. Later it gets kind of transformed into this idea that you can, turn one physical thing into another thing, which, through, chemical operations you can.
Right.
And then later it becomes secularized. You sort of remove the God, you remove the spirituality from it, and that's where you start getting chemistry, when it becomes solely focused on the transformation of one physical thing into another physical thing. But medieval alchemists thought they were doing something very different from that.
Were they part of the university?
No. No,
I was
you went
just-
to the university, you'd probably be studying law or theology.
Okay.
But having said that, in the Middle Ages, the lines between medicine, religion, and magic are not firm. They are not firm at all, and when they are, they're not where we think they'll be.
We have a comment here about, is there a conflation or a connection with the transubstantiation in the Eucharist?
That is interesting. I would have to know more about it. I would expect so, because the idea here is that the physical, physical substance can be changed, but it's not a purely physical operation.
Right.
It's spiritual. It transcends the physical.
Right.
So I can't answer that question with a definite. Oh, well done.
He's
A
about to
definite.
transcend that man's
Exactly. I should really be paying more attention to the game itself, right? But a yap.
Actually, I think I get eaten here just for fun. So you can see.
Oh, I gotta see this.
Maybe I don't. Maybe there's
you'll
a
get
point
eaten, I'm sure.
where I do some purposeful walking in.
Okay, that looks very purposeful and sneaky. Well done.
So Jeff just gave a really, actually good paper about
Oh, thanks.
aged environments within video games that
Oh,
are an
yes.
attempt to kind of meet player expectation about things being old.
Old and crumbly,
Right.
yes.
And would this world have been as old and crumbly as they're making it to be, or was there an attempt to start to kind of clean up as these cities became central?
Cities start in the 14th century municipal governments. So, a few decades before this, municipal governments as cities. Ooh, are you going to get eaten? Sorry, I'm getting really distracted.
Sorry.
Municipal governments start to get very interested in sort of urban hygiene. And they start to pass also, this is several decades before the plague, and maybe this goes back to that earlier question about being unhygienic. City authorities start to really worry about sickness and things being healthy. Now, they don't have a germ theory like we do, but they think a bit about, what sorts of things might make for an unhealthy. Oh, okay, I gotta watch this.
Because that happened, right?
That's how the rats passed
That
away.
that is how you die, right? Like it's like zombies, but really little.
But the cool part is you get to respawn.
Oh, okay. So there is some notion of the idea that city governments are trying to physically clean things up. Like, hey, you can't dig your compost pit in the middle of the road anymore. Okay. That's a safety violation. It's a health violation. And they regulate things like meat markets and fish markets and food purity laws and those sorts of things. But back to sort of the root of the question, I was reading something in this great book of essays that just came out last year called Whose Middle Ages? And it sort of talks a bit, it's a bunch of scholars writing little bitty essays about popular perceptions of the Middle Ages and how it's being sort of used and depicted. And one of the things that the author of the introduction to the volume said, he made this distinction I thought was really great, especially for people who play video games or engage with medievalism and pop culture, and that is the difference between authenticity and accuracy.
Well, that's big in game studies.
Is it? Okay,
Huge.
great.
Yeah.
So it's like this idea that it doesn't need to be accurate, that is true, so much as it needs to be authentic. It needs to feel true.
Yes.
Right?
That's
and
Rosie's
that
stone
is
argument.
very much what I think you're seeing here is, like you said, here's the expectation of everything, things are not going to be spick and span. Things are going to be like you see these boards here. They're kind of put together in a haphazard way. They're not up to code. And so, it's like all those medieval building inspectors are going to come.
Oh my goodness.
No.
Yeah,
They're all part
exactly.
of the Inquisition.
That's how the Inquisition gets involved in this.
Yes.
They're building
No, they
inspectors.
became building inspectors.
Ah, nice. Excellent. Yes. So this is, that slate roof is going to be super slippery.
Stealthy. I have upgraded shoes.
Oh, okay. Excellent. Wonderful. Where did you go? Oh, there you are. Now you were invisible.
Going down the ladder.
Mm-hmm. So I think it's, so to answer your question, I'm not sure, but I think that you are right here, that even if we did have a perfect vision of this is really what it looked like, for a game designer, it's much more important to be in communication to a certain extent, and it's balancing authenticity and accuracy that I think is important, because you need to be in communication with your gamers, with your players, and they, they don't want to be well actually every minute of gameplay.
Sure. I would mention too. Thanks for plugging my paper. That needs to be finished. But you get into what some game studies theorists would call kind of a feedback loop. There's the expectation, so the developer manifests that expectation, and then the players expect that again, and so everything kind of devolves into less than even authenticity. Right? Mm-hmm. It just becomes more and
cartoonish.
More, yes, it just could devolve into that, right?
Right.
Though the idea of player expectation authenticity, I think, is a very important one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and that is the thing too. You've got to. It's sort of like where people would complain about the Game of Thrones TV series not being realistic, and
wait a minute,
it's not realistic. It's not realistic because it has female rulers, because it has people of color, because it has this. Like it has dragons, people.
Right.
It has dragons, and so as a medievalist, as a professional medievalist, I'm not going to be sad or upset about it because dragons, and it is meant to be an entertaining product, not not your medieval history class.
Right. I had a comment there that I totally forgot once I got eaten by rats. There.
Once I got eaten by rats.
There have been games, Battlefield 1 and others, where the other roles from a diverse set of characters have been imbued in the game. And there is, even in this game that was trying to be somewhat authentic, right, about what the war was like, many people say, well, they were in that position. So they were not sorry, whatever.
The cover has an African American
on
the cover.
And so even sometimes when game developers try to add a bit of diversity that could be construed as authentic, not accurate, right? Mm-hmm. There's sometimes pushback from.
Oh, there's always.
I know there's always pushback.
There's always pushback. There are certain individuals, certain groups who will never be convinced that this is a legitimate thing to do. So I see you monitoring the time there. Okay, so what do we?
Doing okay.
We're doing okay. All right, excellent.
Over there
excellent.
Well.
He's also, I think he gets comments.
Yeah,
a buzz on his watch.
I'm also looking at comments.
Okay, all right, excellent, excellent. So yeah, like I said, if I do go on, and so you can just sort of whack me on the head with a.
I'm busy whacking people. It's a sling with a rock or various alchemist.
Bundles?
Yeah,
little grenades. They're little alchemy grenades.
Yeah.
All right.
I was just very disappointed as watching him play that you can't pick up the swords, the shields, and the other implements.
Your weapon.
Yeah, but if given the chance to grab the sword.
But she would not have known how to use a sword.
Fair enough.
And there was no tutorial for such.
And so this is one of the areas where it's actually, it makes perfect sense. Yeah, she could, maybe a shield would be helpful, right? But a sword is big, a sword is heavy, a sword it's not just, unlike sort of the fantasy world, a sword requires some skill.
Sure.
Right? You can't just pick it up. You'd probably cut your leg off. And so, I would anyway, but I'm a klutz. And so it requires some skill, it requires some training. And so if you want to give someone, a player or character in this particular situation, a weapon, then a sling and a rock makes a lot of sense, actually. Because it's not something that requires training or unusual physical strength to use. And yet it can still be quite harmful. I think she should have a flamethrower or a dragon. I want to give her a dragon. Give her a dragon.
That would be accurate.
That would be authentic.
So when we're walking around and I'm hitting people in the head, virtually everyone, who I come across who's part of the Inquisition brigade, I don't know what they were called, is
Knights of the
wearing
Inquisition.
armor, full armor. Which
You're gonna have to
seems,
blur that out.
Okay.
Sorry.
problematic on a few levels.
Oh, it's problematic on so many
Okay.
levels.
Okay, good.
And they have Templar crosses too.
Yeah.
Ah! Oh my gosh.
Oh, you
I
like
could
this? But keep going. Keep going.
Oh, look, hanging bodies.
Yeah.
Hanging bodies. Okay, this again we're talking about here, and this is the many hanging bodies are meant to be sort of give that feeling of creepiness and grossness. But it's also on a smaller scale, exemplary justice, for extremely terrible crimes. Somebody would be, you're not going to execute somebody out of sight and then just bury their body. What good does that do? You've got to then, make it do double duty for you. You're going to set it up. You're going to hang the bodies at the gates of town for a while, for a few days. You won't leave them there for long because that will attract grossness. But you're going to do it as an example, right? And so exemplary justice, and not always execution. But there are a lot of these medieval court records that say you should punish them by doing this and this and this, so this will serve as an example to others. So deterrent is part of it. Now, probably not on the scale that you're seeing there, right? But this is sort of a large-scale operation of some of these things about justice.
There's going to be even a larger scale in a second.
Oh,
As we
awesome!
go into it and look up and
Right.
We'll do this, and then I'd really like to show the university, as it's called.
Okay.
Once you get to see the scale of justice.
Okay, wonderful.
That's
And
the scales of
the
justice.
scales of justice. Yes, I like it.
Oh, you're going to
Okay,
knock
why
a dead body.
Why are you doing
it
that?
attracts the rats.
Oh, I see. Okay, that's
I am
really
one who
smart.
plays games.
That
That
grossness.
is super smart.
Just checking if I need any others.
That is super smart. And the little carrion birds flying around
Yeah.
there. Okay, that's excellent. But yeah, when we get to Inquisition stuff, we can certainly talk about that more. But when
So
I
those
watched
are-
them in the trailer, I couldn't quite figure out why they were wearing
Templars crosses.
Templar crosses. Actually, I do know why, and it has to do with the fact that the Templars in popular culture are the baddies, and that includes, I think, Assassin's Creed, right? That this sort of surviving secret Templar order is this trans-temporal
Yes.
bad guys.
Transtemporal.
Temple. Yes.
Yeah.
That's a good title for a paper.
And
Trans-temporal.
but they're sort of this they're convenient sort of myth of the survival of the they're convenient bad guys,
Yeah.
right?
This guy's gonna kill me.
But-
I pause.
Okay.
Watch this.
Oh, you got
That was
small
not
mode?
smart.
Can you go? Is the university in this?
I don't
This
know because
chapter-
I just got these today.
And we
Nine.
don't want to scrub.
We should try.
I can try scrubbing. So
Okay.
I'm gonna step up here. Don't mind me.
Okay, no,
as I
please.
do.
I never do.
Let's see if.
And then you can take a stab at it after the fingers.
Oh man. Okay, so should I while we're trying to find the right spot, should I make the Inquisition boring for everyone?
Oh yeah.
Okay, excellent. The Inquisition are a bunch of lawyers.
Further.
Okay.
Keep going.
So the they are a bunch of church lawyers, basically. Well, sort of. Inquisition is a at its heart,
Next
Inquisition
video.
is a legal procedure, and it is. Most of the times we think about procedure as accusatory procedure. I say, that guy stole my pig. And I'm a complaining witness, and you say, I did not. I've had this pig for years. This woman's a liar, and there's some sort of back and forth there. But what if the offense that I'm guilty of is sort of a crime where there's no complaining witness, or an offense where there's no complaining witness? If nobody is going to raise a complaint, then how does anybody prosecute this? And so what they need to do is they develop a procedure that's based on Roman law, in which general sort of rumor and common knowledge is enough to initiate a trial. You don't need a complaining witness. What you do need, though, are legal professionals, in this case working for the Catholic Church, who will come in and say, hey, here are some things that we're hoping people aren't doing, and if you've heard about this, I'm going to be hanging around for about 3 days, and why don't you come tell me about what you've heard about what people are doing. And this is a procedure that is originally developed, it's most famously used for heresy, but it's actually originally developed to go after priests who have living girlfriends and children. And nobody in the village or the town is going to complain because it's so normal.
Go up like 3, 2, yeah, and then I'll be in. We're going in the university. So fair enough. That does make it weirdly more interesting and yet
more boring.
Yes,
at the same time. Now, torture does figure in certain limited capacity. So if you want it to be then more gruesome, I can bring the gore if you need to. But
I thought it was a bunch of people hanging out in a little
dance show. Yes, yeah. Are we going to do the thing? I believe they twirled their medieval mustaches. Yes, they're more Templar clothes. But I mean, there are instances in which torture can become a part of it. There are instances in which execution can become a part of it. And then when we get to 16th century, 17th century Spain, things get real bad real fast. But there is a lot of it is just basically an inquest, right?
Yeah.
It's a public prosecution. So, we can talk more about that if you want.
Do we see
this is
a
the
Templar slash
I'm sorry.
here?
Okay, so this is the university.
Yes.
If you went into, this is a sort of a medieval architecture on the monumental scale. So if you were to look at, if you were to go into, and I've been in medieval structures that look like this from the 13th and 14th centuries primarily. And it looks like it is a Gothic style of architecture. It looks a little like Hogwarts. And if you were to go into, say, a royal palace or sort of the back hallways of a big cathedral, this is the sort of architecture you would see. You would not, but there isn't and if you go to a university like Oxford, the older buildings of Oxford or Cambridge University, this is what you'd see, because the Victorians were building specifically copying the Gothic style of the Middle Ages. And so you can see a university that looks like this, but it's not built in the actual Middle Ages. It's built trying to look like it's in the Middle Ages. So even then, it's authenticity rather than accuracy.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Full circle.
Yeah.
You like what I did there?
That was good.
It's awesome. It's super cool, though. It is super cool. It's really pretty. I don't know why they've left their crap lying around here.
The Inquisition came
Look at the books, like they would never do that to books in the Middle Ages.
No, those would be very expensive.
She makes a question, what happened to all the books? And apparently the Inquisition went through there and destroyed everything.
Yeah.
That's what I learned later, more or less. Yeah, it's weird. I'm not saying that's good or accurate.
Okay, yeah, and they would never have books just like lying out on a shelf like that. Goodness gracious, no.
Those are expensive.
A book is expensive. You gotta kill like a whole mass of sheep to make a single book. Oh my goodness gracious, no, it would not happen like that.
Yeah.
And there aren't lending libraries, most libraries.
One of the return carriages.
most libraries would actually be in this period. If there was a library, which is just to say a collection of books, they would be in a monastery.
Right.
And then when you start getting into the 14th and 15th centuries, you start getting private collectors collecting books. But universities, because there's no physical structure, there is no actual library like this, But they didn't need to knock that shelf over either. My goodness.
They just threw pages on the ground.
Oh,
So,
I don't like
Do you want to give
that.
it a try?
Okay,
The
that's
game?
fair.
No, I don't think I'd be very good at it.
okay.
Quite
It's
honestly,
I just
will.
wanted to make sure we asked.
Okay.
Because later you were like,
Dang it! That was my opportunity.
We're always here.
You can always come upstairs.
This really looks like the inside of a smallish Gothic church.
Cathedral,
Yeah, I mean the cathedrals are much bigger than this, but the structure, the architecture, the vaulting on the roof, the pillars, the arches, those sort of pointed arches. This is all very characteristic of this Gothic style of architecture that is sort of dominant. It tends to be more associated with northern Europe, north of the Alps and Pyrenees
that's
than
the
in
end
the
of the
south.
Twitch.
Hello, kitty.
Twitch just ended.
Yeah.
Excellent. So, I mean, I could, if we are out of video, is that why you asked me? Because we're out of video?
We have-
so
We have
play-
more, but that was just the end of that particular segment.
Oh, okay. So if you've got
You
one
want to see the
cool
Inquisition,
segment,
though, right?
let's talk about the Inquisition,
So
right?
they're in the very first video,
Yeah,
right?
they are, but not.
This is one of the things I did not get from the summaries. Why
The
do they
big one-
kill her? Like they kill her father, right? Oops, spoiler. They go out. They do something very bad to her
Yes.
father. Why?
In the very beginning.
Yeah, why?
And
I never got that.
there's in that.
Does he know like some secret?
Chapter
He has
8.
secret knowledge of that.
I mean, chapter 1, they're coming through. I don't think you see the priest. You do see one of the Inquisitors really close up in chapter 8.
In
But
8?
that's not the 8th video, I don't
Right,
know.
no, it's, I think it's the 6th or 7th video. Yes, we have 9 hours of Jeff playing this on. Let's try here. And see
Okay,
what it
great.
takes. Oops, that's the wrong
Basically, it was so he
window.
didn't have to grade.
Okay. No, this is great.
I did
and,
not say that.
And no, this is good. So, and I don't have to play because you've got like lots
That's
of raw
the-
footage here.
the idea.
And
We
I
find-
don't think anybody would find it super entertaining to see. Just like insert in your minds, close your eyes, people, and imagine a middle-aged lady. I played video games about as well as I dance. So you can just, which is not well.
So here we have Hugo's, but Hugo is back.
Hugo's a little boy,
Yeah.
right? Okay. All right. All
Make
right.
certain that we can see that.
That's her brother.
There.
Okay.
They can now.
Running.
They can see it. And I'm hoping we can scrub. You're gonna have to help me out here, Jeff.
Okay.
This is
So many rats.
This you get to see the Roman aqueduct.
Okay.
Ooh, ooh.
So maybe
I like
scrub just a little bit
aqueducts.
ahead, just a little.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh,
There.
there it is. Okay, I can go
There
back.
we are.
So, sorry.
What'd you do there? There.
All right. I was just giving you that.
Okay, weapony stuff.
Yeah, but you want to get away. You want to go ahead of this. You don't want all this. You
Okay.
want just a little bit ahead.
Okay.
Because I take a while to sort this simple puzzle out.
And we don't want to
They're
embarrass.
sorted.
We don't want to
excellent.
embarrass Jeff.
All right, so she's got fire,
Yeah, fire.
and
Moves the rats.
she's moving the rats around, and she wants to go to the middle for some reason.
Oh,
There's a thing.
There's a thing there. That's a packet of rocks for her sling.
Okay,
There's
that's
also
good.
flame on that torch.
Yes. Okay, so they're on an island, basically. All right. Oh, and
Island
they're
of
hiding in the
flame.
grass from this guardsman who's wearing a helmet.
You
So.
might actually kill me.
Oh, Nika, no.
I didn't die just once. I died.
Many times.
All right.
times.
All right.
Try that again. The save points in here are pretty tight, so you usually don't have to go
Is
back
he
too far.
a?
He's
Looks like a guardsman.
He's I don't know if he's a British soldier.
Oh yeah, this is.
Oh, it's
yeah,
the
there
100
are-
Years' War,
There
too.
are
They
Edwardian
totally
soldiers.
forgot.
They're
Yeah.
everywhere.
They're
Totally
everywhere.
forgot about this.
So this is a
Okay.
battlefield
All
of
right.
dead British soldiers, but not the British
British
soldiers.
Uh-huh. Okay. Excellent.
So they're now sneaking
And you
over
can kind of see
that.
the aqueduct
All right.
along
Which would
that.
have made sense because the Romans would have been in this part of France back in the day, as we say. This is all set back in the day.
Way back in the day.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
You should scrub it a little bit more, because here I have to do this puzzle.
Okay.
I mean, puzzle is a strong word for what I have to do. Sean really likes this part.
Oh yeah, this one gets glitchy. It's pretty hilarious.
Okay, so what's going to happen here?
So this fine soldier of a gentleman here
Unless I've already killed him.
is
Bonk.
No, I haven't.
going to. He's going to glitch right here because he hit him, I guess, in the nethers.
Oh, excellent.
And
There was some dialogue earlier where they were saying, that's how you beat them.
Where you noticed that.
Yes, and so did your character,
Yes.
apparently, too.
And so now he turns his back and apparently can't see 3 children trying to steal.
The 3 who were just throwing rocks at him? Okay.
He just
Maybe he's stunned.
So then I'm like, well, let's just go.
and then he finally notices.
Maybe he'll help us push this thing.
Yeah,
Excuse me,
Is
this
the Inquisition in this section? Somewhere?
Somewhere.
Okay, what is that? Oh, they're at
Oh,
the
sorry,
lunch
that was
counter.
the workbench where
Okay.
you get to make your
Up in
alchemy.
the
Okay, cool.
Yeah. You were talking about armor before.
Was I? Because I know nothing about
Oh,
armor.
no, or in the fact that they're all...
Inquisitors are not going to wear armor
Right,
because
right.
Inquisitors are not knight. Inquisitors are generally Dominican friars.
I met someone later
wouldn't have
who
had-
is like that.
Who wouldn't have had that
Who
kind
is
of
like that? Who is the
disrespect.
Dominican friar?
He is clearly a monk, friar of some sort,
Okay.
who's not wearing armor, who is in charge.
Oh, not you
Council.
met him. You met
Yeah.
him. You met him in
Yeah.
the game.
In the game,
Oh,
yes,
okay.
yes,
I
yes.
was like, I was at the store.
Jeff-
He was not
Jeff
wearing armor.
Anika.
Okay, all right. I was like, well, of course he wasn't wearing armor. Okay, all right. I get what you're saying now. So you meet someone like that. He is some sort of. You encounter him in the gameplay,
Yes.
and he is a monk or a friar or some sort of religious person, not wearing armor because why would he be?
Right.
Um,
Directing people
Who wear armor.
who wear armor in the sense of this needs to be done for the Inquisition.
Although I will say that by this time period and throughout most of the medieval period, you run into monks, you run into nuns, you run into friars, and they are going to come from the same socioeconomic class as the people who are out there wearing armors and thumping people with swords. And in fact, there's a lot of kind of church regulation saying, hey, you, monks and priests, don't go hunting and hawking, because they never stop thinking of themselves as nobles. And occasionally you get stories of them, like in the Song of Roland and in El Cid. In both of those, there is a priest who's whomping people with mace. In battle, and the only thing that you can't do as a member of the clergy is you're not allowed to wield any weapon that sheds blood. And so edged weapons are out, but apparently they, in these epic poems, they get by with a mace on a technicality. Now, this is literary. This is literary depictions. I don't know, but we do know that these, from these regulations, we can guess that some of these local, these priests and bishops never really stopped identifying as part of the same class that would produce these worldly lords. But armor is not a part of their friar uniform.
Okay. You want to do some wrap up?
Yeah,
I know we have
because
all right. So it's been fun, people.
We're gonna put this to bed here.
All
Let's
right.
switch
Look
back
at the tent.
over.
The circus is in town.
Yes.
Okay.
No,
Awesome.
England just announced itself when it laid its temporary forts.
Okay. Awesome. Are there more bodies? There's a body.
Yeah, and they're using it for
target practice.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. As one does.
Yeah. If you have a body, you might as well
What
put
else
it
are
to
you going
use.
to do with it? You have a body, you have arrows.
Hang it outside the city gate or shoot it with arrows.
Exactly.
All right, we're going to switch back over to there. So now you can see yourself again in more detail.
I'm probably like the whole time I've been looking like slightly off.
That's okay. We are still working out.
You're going to take care of this in post,
yeah,
right?
we are still working out all of our technical abilities.
We're getting
here.
better.
We're getting way better. Yeah.
It's good to have gone like fit.
Yeah.
Awesome. Excellent. Now this is good. This has been really fun.
Cool.
So final comments, questions? Questions.
Yes.
I asked a lot of questions.
One of the things that I think is really interesting about this game, at least from what I can tell from these clips, from what I've seen online, is it's a quest game rather than a game where you are, fighting against other players. And so the game, while there is, violence and gore in it, the violence and gore is not the point of this, which I think maybe makes it fair, and you guys could tell me more than this, makes it fairly unusual for a video game set in the Middle Ages. And the idea too, some of the things that I found very interesting is the idea that they've chosen a female protagonist. And that sort of gets you thinking outside the box a lot of times when we imagine our protagonists of historical periods, we imagine, the Roman centurion, we imagine the medieval knight, we imagine the revolutionary soldier, and they're sort of all of a piece. They're male and their military is their main function, because that's the easiest thing to map some sort of combat or conflict onto, right? And so I really appreciate what this game has done imaginatively, which is to give you tasks, to place risk in there, to place a goal in there, but it is not necessarily focused on combat narrative, even though combat does come into it now and then. And I think that shows, how broad-based the gaming landscape can be. And it also shows, using the Middle Ages, how much of a canvas historical periods can be, and how you're only really limited by the imagination in terms of, the more you know about these historical periods, then the more you can imagine, you can think outside the box in terms of how do we structure a game? What are interesting dilemmas and situations that we can put people in and give them a goal to achieve? So that's my plug for study history, kids. Stay in school.
And I think because it's a stealth game mostly, which situates it much differently than a lot of games in like the Roman era and medieval are these sort of fighting hack and slash things. And another good thing is there's a female protagonist, but on top of that, I would add it's not only is that positive, but they haven't objectified her sexually, which happens a lot.
Right. I mean, they do in some ways. They put her into a surrogate mothering position.
Yes, they do. But that's much less.
But everyone needs a sidekick.
Everybody does.
Everyone needs a sidekick. So I think that's
Hugo. Without giving too much away, if you're still going to play the game, Hugo gets some really cool.
Oh, I read sort of like the synopsis on Wikipedia. So it's good she takes Hugo with her, right? So don't get your little brother, kids.
Don't leave your brother behind.
And it does get a little more fantastical.
It seems very cool, but no dragons?
No dragons.
No dragons.
No.
That's okay. That's totally fine with me.
Well, the conversation brought me back around on the game, so I was getting really kind of negative about it.
Really? So what was it? What was the? What were your negative reactions based on?
Yeah, I have a little post on our blog, criticalplay.org.
Get that plug in there. Okay, excellent.
A lot of it just came down to without having really given the game much thought, that all of those rats, there are points of the game where rats literally explode out of the ground as you're walking through
stone walls,
or through stone walls, or pouring out in like lava ties.
So it's a zombie visual.
It is, right? And it's fast zombies, right?
It's not
zombies.
slow.
Yeah. It's not shambling zombies.
Yeah.
28 days later.
Yeah, fast zombies are scarier.
And for me, at first watching this, and I'm impatient.
It was just too gimmicky?
It's too gimmicky. I'm also impatient, so the kinds of stealth that happen in this game make me cringe a little bit. The way that the non-player characters, you can just sneak right behind them.
Yeah.
Or you can, like, be right beside them.
Yeah. And they don't
really
react.
Good.
And that could be patched and made better.
The narrative does feel, even though it gets more fantastical, which I haven't got to yet, it gets stronger. Like I became more invested in it.
Right.
Even though there are issues.
And
What
I've-
game does it?
I've
Oh, we're
got
at it.
Speaking of
Yes,
issues.
issues, I've got to
All
go
right,
teach.
all right. So,
I have 30 of them.
Yes.
well, you guys, I want to thank you. This has
Thank
been
you.
really fun.
I really
And
appreciate you coming up.
thank you, audience.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. Study the Middle Ages.
I'm trying to give you another bump.
Yes.
Thank you. Excellent. Don't wait for the next neo-medieval fantasy series.
Nope.
Come see me today.
Yep.
So, or
And if
not
you like-
today. I've got office hours.
Right. Cool. If you
Okay.
like this, we have Dr. Angela Hawk coming in on March 26th. We're playing Town of Light,
What
which
is that?
is a
Set
it's
in
set in the 1940s in
Italy.
Italy, and it explores an old asylum and
Ooh,
mental
that's right,
health.
because she does
yeah,
stuff on madness.
yeah,
and the
mental
history of
health
madness.
and the treatment of
Interesting.
asylum.
Early thoughts from Sean are
It's good.
disturbing.
It's disturbing. It is.
Oh.
So far, sexual abuse,
Ooh,
rape,
Ooh.
doll horror,
wait. Doll horror?
as in scary doll that.
Oh,
Yeah.
creepy dolls.
Creepy dolls.
Okay.
Maybe not Chucky, but you know.
Yeah.
But creepy dolls.
Yeah. So,
Mm,
and a lot of
okay.
walking around.
A lot. Well,
Yeah.
that's what this game is about.
Yeah.
So you got to wear like your Fitbit when
Yeah,
you're in
exactly.
these games.
I get my
Does
steps.
this count as my steps?
Yes.
As watching this game play? All right.
all right.
Excellent.
So thank you all.
Thank
And
you.
thank you, Marie.
And thank
All
you
right.
guys
Yeah.
for inviting me. This has been a whole hoot and a half. And I hope that people enjoyed it.
Cool.
Yes, I think so.
Bye-bye.